Good evening, everyone. Good evening. Welcome to Chimoge's Comments America. I am Chimoge. Please like the stream, share it, and subscribe. Whether you're here right now in real time or you're watching this in the future. As usual, I'm going to give everybody some time to get on the stream. So I'm either going to start in 4 minutes or when I get 4 likes, whichever comes first. So just hang out until then. Okay, I think 4 minutes is up. Again, I'm Chimoge. For anyone who just joined or just started watching, thank you for watching. Please again like the stream, or if you're watching in the future, like the video, share it with other people, and subscribe to the channel. Please also, you can donate to the channel in that link in the chat, or also the link I'll post below the video to help. That helps a lot as well. And if you like that music I was playing, it's actually my own song that available on all streaming platforms as well as YouTube on my other channel. I'll put that in the chat. And also, I think I'll end up putting it either in the comments or the description of the video for anyone who's interested. Um, Hold on, let me. So sorry. Okay, there that is. And again, I just want to get going right away. Obviously, this stream currently it is 11:54 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. My goal, usually up to this point, had been to start the streams at 7 p.m. Obviously, that didn't happen today. That kind of really hasn't, happened the last few times I've done this, and I'm gonna be changing up the streaming time, but I'll talk about that at the end of the video. Thank you for and all of you that are here, as well as everyone watching this in the future. But anyway, I don't want to stay up too long. I want to get to sleep at a not quite so ridiculous hour. So I'm just gonna get right to it. Obviously, as you guys can tell from the thumbnail, today I'm talking about the FBI's raid of former President Donald Trump's residence at Mar-A-Lago Plaza, right? So on, hold up, let me share my screen and let me find the exact date. So recently, I want to get the exact date. Let's see. Okay, they did that. Shoot. Monday. Let's forgive me. Let me look at my calendar, get a bearing on the dates. So August 8th. So that was just this past Monday, August 8th of 2022. The FBI got a search warrant and they raided former President Donald Trump's residence at Mar-a-Lago Plaza, right? As this NPR article goes into. And obviously, this is a very shocking event because it's not often. And in fact, I can't even think of another time this would have happened other than Watergate, where the FBI would raid, a former president's residence forcefully, looking for documents. It was said that they were looking for, classified materials that Trump had been in the possession of, because apparently, after the president leaves office, he's not supposed to keep classified materials, in, I guess, in his own private residence. So that's what they're saying Trump was doing. Apparently the Attorney General Merrick Garland came out and said that they were looking for classified materials related to, you know, something related to nuclear weapons, right? So apparently Trump has some classified materials related to nuclear weapons. At least that was according to Merrick Garland. I don't know what else, what other theories they are there. Um, let's see. Let me find the article where Merrick Garland talks about nuclear. Yeah, here we go. FBI search of Trump's Mar-a-Lago related to nuclear documents, sources say. Or maybe I guess um, Garland might not have come out and said that directly, but it was sources, um, whoever that is. Um, okay, here it is. Classified documents relating to nuclear weapons were among the items FBI agents sought in a search of former President Donald Trump's Florida residence on Monday, according to people familiar with the investigation. Okay, so this is interesting wording. They said were among the items. So that doesn't mean that was the only thing they were looking for, right? And it's kind of vague. Documents relating to nuclear weapons. How are they relating to them? It's kind of vague. And again, it's not clear if these reports are vague because the information genuinely hasn't been divulged to people in the media, or if the people in the media are intentionally keeping it vague to make it seem worse than it is. Because perhaps if they get specific, it won't it'll make the FBI's actions seem unwarranted. Because of course, for those of you who don't know, the mainstream media does have a bias against Donald Trump. And to be clear, I am no Trump supporter, not at all. So I'm not saying that because I love the guy. You know, I had two opportunities to vote for the guy, I never did. Um, you know, can't see myself ever doing that unless, you know, like just something absolutely crazy happens. Um, so yeah, I'm not a Trump supporter. However, it is clear that the mainstream media has a bias against him. And I'll be getting into that in just a second. Um, but anyway, right, let me stop sharing for a second. So basically, um, so that's what they were said to be looking for. However, with this incident, I don't think it's the most important thing is what the FBI was looking for. I think the more important thing is you know, what is likely to be the outcome of this investigation, right? Because I think ultimately what will determine the political significance of this action going forward is what actually happens to Donald Trump, right? So let's zoom out for a second, um, right? And talk about the broader context in which this is happening. So obviously in the United States, as I've mentioned before on my previous live streams, and as I'm going to break down even more detail in upcoming videos, right? The United States was founded um, by um, a few white tribes that came to the U.S. from Britain. And of those tribes, the most dominant were the Puritans, right? The people who live in the northeast of the United States, New England, the people who are commonly referred to with the misnomer of Anglo-Saxon. And there were also a couple other tribes that were allied with them. And then but they were above these other tribes in the hierarchy. And especially there was one in particular, one other tribe or group of tribes, depending on what your theory is on their exact ancestry, that came from England to America. These people are commonly referred to with the misnomer of Scots Irish. These people had been oppressed by the Puritans and had been fighting them throughout U.S. history. And then other white tribes who came to the U.S. over time, whether they be Dutch, French, German, etc., and sub tribes within all those groups allied with one of those factions or the other based on their own perceived interests and political convenience, right? And then the same thing kind of happened with non-whites, although with them it's kind of a bit more of a, um, I guess there's a bit more of an extreme, um, I guess, exploitation by the Puritan faction, because historically they kind of sided with them, but as a pawn, and they've gotten even less out of it than the whites who sided with the Puritans, right? So anyway, that's the backdrop of American politics. So then, this tribal warfare has reached, you know, a very critical point before during the Civil War in the U.S. That began in 1861. And it's looking like that's going to happen again because the U.S., unfortunately, is again on the brink of civil war, right? So, in this context, Donald Trump got elected president, right? And who is Donald Trump? So, Donald Trump is the grandson of a German immigrant to the US from his patrilineage, and his mother was a Scottish immigrant to the US, right? And when his ancestors, and in his mother's case, parents, immigrated to the US, they were not rich, right? So these people didn't have money, and they're also not higher tribe whites as far as the hierarchy within the white race goes, right? They're not the lowest tribe, because obviously there are groups of white people that are grouped below Germans and Scottish people, but they're not at the very top. They're not Puritans. They're not, like British royals, anything like that. They're not any sort of English person, right? Because obviously Scots are below any English group in the hierarchy, right? So he's not, as far as American politics goes, by ancestry, he's not in the in group. However, despite that, he managed to attain a lot of money. And there's debates over whether or not he's actually a billionaire or millionaire. Usually people say he's a billionaire, but that has some reporting has disputed that. And to be clear, being a billionaire is subjective anyway, unless you're talking about a cash money billionaire. That's always a subjective designation anyway, right? But without going too far into that, um, he managed to attain a lot of money. Obviously, his dad was the first person in his family to get a lot of money, and then he helped Donald make even more money. So through that, he was able to become one of the wealthiest people in New York. And this is way before he got elected president. He was a big real estate developer. He was also a reality TV star, all this stuff. He was big, he was very famous, and he was very popular at a point. However, he was never really accepted by the most elite rich people in New York, right? Because even though he had the money, he did not have the right ancestry. He did not have the right tribal background, right? And he always resented that, understandably so. Not to say that, one should be especially pressed about integrating into, wealthy, oppressive elites. But, nonetheless, that is discrimination. So, I mean, you have some right to be mad about that. But anyway, right. The whole point I'm making is that even though he had a lot of money and was much more privileged than most Americans, he was never really in that top stratum, right? And even though he historically donated to the Democrats, for a long time he'd flirted with the idea of getting into politics as something other than a Democrat. Um, I believe he either ran for or supported a third party ticket at some point in the late 90s or early 2000s, right? So again, right? Not because again, the Democrats are the party of the highest tribe of whites, those New England Puritans and their allies, right? So if you're not with them, you're siding with some sort of lower tribe white politics, and usually, in many cases, that is some sort of what is commonly referred to as a white nationalist politics. And to be clear, like the way white nationalist is used in common parlance is inaccurate because the so-called white liberals, right, those white elites, those highest tribes, those are also white nationalists, right? They also want um as a as a white group to own and control their resources and creations, right? Um, you know, they don't want and they want to do so on a racially exclusive basis. So they're also white nationalists, the same way they're also white supremacists, right? They also think white people are the best. They want to promote that ideal. So when they only refer to people on the right as white supremacists, white nationalists, that's inaccurate. They all are. But nonetheless, um, if you're not a Democrat, you're with some sort of lower tribe. If you're not a Democrat and you're not part of the Republican establishment, which is really one of those other aristocratic tribes that had a testy alliance with the Puritans, right? That's what the Republican establishment is, right? And Trump was never that either. So if you're not either of those two, you're involved in some sort of lower tribe white nationalist politics, which he has been, right? Um, so anyway, Trump is doing all that, right? And because of that, also because he was excluded from the very top stratum of New York and American elite society, and that's not his background. I think that also affected his mannerisms and sensibilities and his politics. And this is crucial because this was big to why he appealed to so many of those quote unquote poor whites later on, right? So when he ran in 2016 and he won, right, the liberal establishment was, and as well as the Republican establishment, quite frankly, was aghast because he was a lower tribe white nationalist president. He was representing the interests and the agenda of those lower tribe whites that they had been trying to suppress for all of American history, right? And because like they had rigged the political system such that um, you know it was very difficult for anyone to win who either didn't represent their interests or the interest of the tribes that formed the Republican establishment, right? Because when you're in that window, they're okay. Because the interests of those two groups are pretty similar. They're not exactly alike, which is why they're different factions and why the higher tribe whites in the Democratic establishment would prefer they win than the Republicans, but they're not necessarily going to, um, throw everything away if the Republican establishment wins. But if the Republican masses win, right, those lower tribe whites, then they get scared, right? And that's what happened with Trump. And since then, because it's been making them realize that their kind of rigged system can't perfectly exclude the whites they're trying to oppress. They've been um, becoming increasingly more and more undemocratic in their dealings with Trump, right? And so this started on a basic level with questioning his legitimacy. His whole presidency, they questioned his legitimacy as president. And again, for the millionth time, I'm not a Trump supporter. And if you ask me, the US presidency as an office itself is morally illegitimate, you could say, because it is um, the job of a president essentially is to do the immoral work of maintaining and furthering the American empire, right? So me saying that they were questioning his legitimacy is not me saying that, I held that office in especially high regard in the first place. But it is acknowledging that they questioned his right to be president, um, even after he'd won the election, way more than they did any other president before him in the modern era, right? So, um, and that's kind of an undemocratic. That is an undemocratic action because they were delegitimizing the democratic process that had brought Trump into office. And again, that's not me saying that the U.S. democratic system is good. I think it's a flawed system, but nonetheless, they were delegitimizing it in a way they hadn't done before. They were calling it into question in a way they hadn't before. And they were doing it just because they lost. It was not because for any other high minded moral reason. It's just because they lost. Right. So, anyway, fast forward to 2020, Trump loses the election, and then his people, due to Joe Biden, what um, the liberals have done to Trump. They're calling him into question. They're saying that the election was rigged, even though there's no, evidence that it was rigged any more so than any other U.S. election, right? So you obviously see that the precedent of delegitimizing elections and delegitimizing a peaceful means of transferring power has been set, and that's now the norm in American politics, right? So this happens, but Biden is pretty unpopular. He's also fairly old and frail, so because of that, it looks very likely that he's not going to run 2024, and there's not a clear Democratic candidate that would run in his place. So there's a vulnerability there for sure. And because of that, Trump has been staying, in the public eye. He's been doing a lot of rallies, even though the mainstream media hasn't been covering them. He's been doing them, maintaining a lot of support because it seems pretty clear he's going to run again for the 2024 election. And it seems most likely at this point that he will win, right? So the Democrats are very scared of this and they want to prevent that at all costs. And that is where this FBI raid comes in. Now, again, we don't even have the full details of why exactly the FBI raided Trump. Again, there's that speculation that it had to do with something related to nuclear weapons, something related to Trump having declassified documents that he shouldn't have had. So it's hard to fully judge the technical, legal legitimacy of the FBI's actions, right? And to be clear, I would not be at all surprised if Trump broke the law or broke the protocol here with the way he handled something, because he is a habitual line stepper. He is a habitual lawbreaker. It's just who he is, right? But at the same time, and again, we don't have like hard evidence of the severity of what has happened. So I will put a caveat to everything I say based off of that. For all we know, what Trump would have done could be really, really serious and really unprecedented and inconsequential. However, my intuition tells me that's not the case. My intuition tells me that if Trump has indeed stepped over the line, and maybe hasn't, if Trump has indeed stepped over the line, it's a relatively minor infraction. It's not a life or death offense he has committed. And essentially, by raiding him. The FBI is just trying to generate controversy to, um, you know, dampen Trump's image, to harm his image, I should say, in the public eye. And if they do end up pressing some sort of charges and taking some sort of legal action at him, they're essentially throwing the book at him. They are, you know, in other words, prosecuting him for things that, even though they're technically against the law, really in practice, most people don't get in trouble for, and people shouldn't get in trouble for, right? So, um, what are my thoughts on the FBI's actions then? Again, because it's possible Trump might have done something wrong, and even something very wrong, although I doubt that. I'm not going to tell the FBI not to punish Trump somehow, not to arrest him. I won't tell them categorically to do that. However, I will tell them to only do that if the US government as a whole first does something to alleviate the suffering, and then the suffering of the poor whites, and then the violent and warlike sentiments that arise from that, right? Because at the moment, the lower tribe whites, right, the so-called alt-right, are so bloodthirsty and so ready to fight that if they were to punish Trump, and especially if they were to hand down a serious punishment, say they arrest him, right, that would upset them so much it could ignite civil war in and of itself. That could really, really happen, right? And it's not worth going that far. Um, yeah, it's just not worth going that far. The government has to look at the bigger picture with this Trump thing, right? Because essentially, um, the lower tribe whites are very upset for really four basic reasons, right? One, they're poor. Obviously, they don't have as much money as they should have, as much money as they need to fully self-actualize. To be clear, right, the average poor white American is still richer than at least about 50% of the people on Earth, probably more, right? So comparatively, you know, they're not in the worst possible condition. I do think they tend to be a bit, to an extent, hyperbolic about their position in context, but nonetheless, they do still have a right to be aggrieved, because the people poorer than them are really experiencing a level of poverty no human being should ever have to experience, right? So I say all that to say that despite a possible, um, lack of proper contextualization of their economic suffering, um, they are suffering economically, and it is a result of their oppression by those higher tribe whites who make up the liberal establishment, and they are owed economic reparations and an economic revival because of that, right? So I think that's the main reason they're upset. This, or that's not the main reason, rather. That's one reason they're upset. The second reason is they get disrespected a lot in the culture, and you can see this through things like the disrespect of accents of lower tribe whites. You know, it's common in popular media and popular culture to make fun of Southern accents or Midwestern accents, things of that nature. There's also a lot of derision of their culture, stuff like, uh, I don't know, working blue collar jobs, um, the derision of like evangelical Christianity, things of that nature. There's even common jokes about people in rural and poor white areas, marrying blood relatives, right? Something that I don't know if that necessarily has a basis in fact. I don't know how that stereotype came about, right? So anyway, these things in the culture attack the spirit of a people and obviously get them upset. That's the second thing. The third reason they're upset is just a problem that is general to all white people, and that is just cultural degeneracy. White culture, as a result of what they have done to themselves over tens of thousands of years, um, and how extreme they've gotten over time, is very deficient of what it needs to sustain white people. And it's very harmful to white people themselves. So these people are spiritually deprived and emotionally rotten at their core. And that's all white people, right? But I think it hurts the poor whites the most because they don't have the economic resources and the, I guess, cultural respect from others to alleviate that pain, right? So that's something that needs to be fixed. And then the fourth thing I think is the very structure of America, right? America was never designed for poor whites. America was never designed for lower tribe whites, at least for them to thrive. America was designed to serve the Puritans most, and then every every other group of white people in descending order on the white tribal hierarchy. Period. So it is just a Puritan ethno state. Everyone else in there is oppressed to some degree. And part of the way this manifests is just the massive size of the country. The United States is too big. You cannot properly govern a country that is this size and meet everyone's needs. So the US needs to be slowly and peacefully broken into components, and people need to be allowed to self govern. And this has to be done in a very specific way to prevent violence. Because if it is done the wrong way, we could see a lot of violence on a lot of different levels, right? So, anyway, these are the four things that are upsetting the poor whites. One, poverty. Two, cultural disrespect and discrimination. Three, white cultural deficiency. And four, the excessive size and inherent oppressive nature of the United States of America, right? So these things have to be alleviated to prevent them from, you know, uh, doing their half of what is necessary for, that internal conflict to happen in the U.S. Because to be clear, they're only half the problem. I know I'm talking about them being bloodthirsty, but the higher tribe whites, unfortunately, at the moment are just as bloodthirsty, right? Which is why they refuse to de-escalate. They keep doing things like this Trump raid that will piss these people off, right? But anyway, what do I think they should do before arresting Trump if they even do that? Because to be clear, I think it would be fine if they just left Trump alone. That might even be best. That would probably be the least complicated things. Because the stuff I'm going to talk about, they should do regardless of whether or not they punish Trump, right? But especially if you want to punish Trump, you have to do at least two of these things I'm talking about first, right? And the two that should be done first are one, they have to do something to tackle the poverty, and two, they have to do something to tackle the cultural disrespect, right? They do those two things because those are the quickest things to implement. Because obviously, regenerating white culture, healthy white culture, might even have to just say generating healthy white culture because it's, well, I say white people have never had a healthy culture. No, I won't go that far Because if you look way back into their history, there have been eras when it looks like they had a healthy culture, and they were um I mean, the culture wasn't necessarily perfect, but I think it was a lot better than it is now. And they had more raw materials commonly available to work with to perfect themselves, right? At least certain segments of white people. And I think if you were to go back way far enough, you would find it. But that's a bit more of a more complicated subject. Don't want to get into all that now. I'll get into that in a future video. But long story short, white cultural healing takes a long time. Restructuring the U.S. takes a long time, but um, at least beginning some sort of economic stimulus and revival does not take as long, and really ending cultural disrespect does not take as long. At the very least, in the mainstream media, the powers that be could send out a message and say, hey, don't say these things about poor whites to piss them off. That could help a lot. If they did those two things, at least the temperature of the lower tribe whites could cool down enough that maybe, um, you know, they could handle seeing Trump get punished or prosecuted without setting everything off. But even then, there's not a 100% guarantee. Overall, what I would recommend is that the FBI, um, one, they before they hand down any punishment to Trump, it would be best if the U.S. government did those two things I recommended. But second, if they're going to punish Trump at all, I think they should strongly consider just leaving him alone, because my gut is telling me this is just political football they're playing here, and that Trump didn't really do anything seriously wrong. But if he did something wrong, I suggest they give him a punishment that does not entail him getting arrested, right? Um, Fine him, I don't know. Um, you could strip him of some privilege, but don't arrest him. If you arrest Trump, I mean, you're basically setting the whole thing off. Um, yeah, and I guess I could also add what I'd recommend for Trump to do. I mean, I would recommend he just not break laws unnecessarily, break protocols unnecessarily. But that man's in his 70s. He's been a he's been a shark his whole life. I don't know if he's gonna change his spots. And at the end of the day, he is just one guy. This whole situation is way bigger than just him. So he could fail, and we could still succeed. He could change himself. Things could still fail if nothing else changes. But anyway, that's all I have. So long story short, I think that this FBI raid of Trump is unnecessary at best and a farce at worst. I think that they should consider not punishing him at all. And if they do punish him, they should first make sure that the government alleviates the anger of lower tribe whites by giving them an economic stimulus and also increasing the amount to which they are respected in the culture. And then also the FBI should not give Trump a punishment that entails him being arrested or detained for any period of time. But that's it. Thank you for everyone who watched in real time. Thank you for everyone who's going to watch this in the future. Again, please like the video, share it with people you know, subscribe to the channel. Please also follow the link in the chat, and then also I'll post it under the video to donate to the channel. That really helps. And then also just one other note, going forward, I'm still going to be streaming every day on Sunday, but starting next week, this live stream will happen at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. That's 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time instead of 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So check in at that time. But if no one has any questions and I don't see anyone with questions, then I'll just call it a night because it is quite late. All right. Thank you so much, everyone, and have a good night. See you next time. Goodbye.